to the tutorial. My name is Luna and I've been designed to guide you through this program. First, take a look around the room to get a feel for your environment. Now, hold your hands out in front of you. You will see the Vive controllers. These are your tools. The circular pad on the left-hand controller is your teleport button. This will teleport you from area to area. Holding down this pad will cause a target symbol to appear on the ground. When you release the pad, you will be teleported to a targeted destination. At certain points during the simulation, areas that you will need to teleport to will be highlighted. Please turn around and practice teleporting to the highlighted area. Excellent! Now return to the table to continue the tutorial. If you look on the back of the right-hand controller, you will find the trigger button. To pick up something, such as the monitor, press the controller against the object and squeeze the right trigger. Go ahead and pick up the monitor on the table. Now that you've acquired the monitor, pressing the X button on the right-hand controller will allow you to cycle through your inventory. When selected, the equipment in your inventory will replace the right-hand controller. Press the X button now to select your monitor. With the monitor selected, pressing the A button will take an atmospheric reading for the current levels of oxygen, flammables, and toxins. Before we continue, press the X button to cycle back to the controller. Good job! Now let's take a look at the menu system by pressing the Y button. The Y button signals to me to project the main menu, which doubles as the permit. The menu contains the objectives you will need to complete in order to pass the training simulation. If you haven't already pressed the Y button, please do so now. You will notice that the Atmospheric Meters Ready objective has a check mark to indicate that you have completed this task. To close the menu, press the Y button again. Now let's take a look at some of the other interactions involving the right trigger. The trigger can be used to perform certain tasks, such as turning the valve handle over to shut it off. If you look to the table, you will notice that we have replicated a valve for you to practice closing. Touch the right controller to the valve handle. Pull and hold the trigger, and then motion clockwise to turn the valve. When you have successfully closed the valve, it will no longer rotate. Attempt to close the valve now. Congratulations! You have successfully closed the valve. Now let's take a look at another interaction of the right trigger. If you look at the table, you will see someone misplaced their thermos. To pick up and move the object, press your controller to the object and squeeze the right trigger. You will notice that the object now follows your controller. Let go of the object, release the right trigger. Let's test this functionality by moving the misplaced thermos to the flashing spot on the desk. Now you will notice a mini model of an oil refinery appear in the central table. If you look closely at the mini model, you will notice some highlighted areas. All of these areas can be considered confined spaces that require detailed permits for entry. It's now time to use your new skills and move outside to the oil refinery. Please teleport to the door now. Press the right controller to the doorknob and squeeze the right trigger to exit the tutorial room. You are now standing in the hub area. At various times during the simulation, you will be required to return to this location to advance within the simulation. The cabinet in front of you will contain all the equipment required to complete the tasks in each portion of the simulation. If at any time you would like to review the controls, press the B button to display the diagram of the control scheme. To prepare yourself for the next section, let's take a look at the work permit. Press Y to open the permit. A new permit is required for every job involving confined space entry. Specific equipment is standard for all such areas, such as a hard hat, steel-toed shoes, but other equipment is used based on the hazards that are present in each environment. You will be teleporting to the trench after obtaining the proper equipment. The permit states that you're replacing a section of pipeline and that the trench has already been dug. New pipes have been attached to the old ones and the blinding process has been completed. The attendant needs to inspect these connections before any entrance into the confined space occurs. Atmospheric testing must be done. Look at your permit. Identify the equipment that you would need for the confined space. Grab your personal protection equipment first. Pick up the hard hat. The hard hat provides protection from falling rocks, tools, and anything else. Pick up the glasses. The glasses provide protection from liquid, debris, and vapors. Pick up the ear protection. The ear protection reduces the noise exposure level and the risk of hearing loss for the entrant. Pick up the steel-toe boots. Steel-toe boots protect your toes from heavy objects. Pick up the Nomex suit. The Nomex protects your skin from toxic burns and is fire resistant. Pick up the gloves. The gloves protect your hands from cuts, burns, and abrasions. Pick up the harness. A harness will allow for non-entry extraction from any confined space. Pick up the breathing apparatus. The breathing apparatus protects against asphyxiation. Pick up the fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher should always be located next to the attendant monitoring the confined space so that you can be ready to put out any conflagration. Pick up the monitor. The attendant will need to test that the air is safe before the permit is signed. However, you must always have your own monitoring system attached to your Nomex suit to detect air quality. Make sure to check its batteries. Pick up the radio. Make sure your radio is on and that you can communicate clearly with the attendant. It is your lifeline. Also, make sure to check its batteries. Congratulations! You have acquired all the equipment you need to enter the trench and have filled out the portion of the permit that lists the equipment required to operate in a confined space environment. Please proceed to the trench by moving to the flashing spot behind you. You are now in front of the trench. Don't let the open air fool you. You still need a permit to enter. A confined space may contain several kinds of potential hazards. A worker could possibly become trapped, even engulfed. The confined space may contain materials that have potential to asphyxiate. The air in the surrounding environment might also contain toxic materials. These hazards could potentially be present in the trench. It is important that we perform atmospheric testing before entering. The monitor must be calibrated by the attendant before any testing is performed. Calibrating the monitor in environmental conditions that are the same as the actual workplace conditions is essential. The purpose of this is to confirm that the gases can get to the instrument's sensors and that all of the alarms are functioning. If the measured levels exceed the monitor's programmed threshold, this alarm should sound. To effectively calibrate your equipment, it's important to understand what constitutes safe levels of oxygen, flammables, and toxins. Safe levels of oxygen are 19.5% to 23.5%. Safe levels of flammables and toxins depend on the substances you are working with in the confined space. A hazardous level of gasoline is 1.4% and 7.6%, which could result in combustion and conflagration. A hazardous level of benzene is 1 parts per million for an 8-hour workday and 5 parts per million for any 15-minute period. You will be testing under the assumption that you will be entering the space for a period of no longer than 15 minutes. To properly test the levels for the trench's confined space, you must take your samples from the air in the lower portion of the trench. As you learned in the tutorial room, you can use X to cycle through your equipment. Once the monitor is selected, you can press the A button to collect your sample. Approach the edge of the trench, hold the monitor out towards the lower area, and collect your sample now. Further safety considerations in the trench environment include ensuring the trench is shielded properly to prevent cave-ins, and that any ladder used sticks out a minimum of 3 feet above surface level. You have now completed your training in the trench area. Please approach the flashing spot behind you to be transported once again to the hub. There you will begin the training for the distillation portion of the simulation. You are back at the hub. You will now be instructed in the proper procedures for filling out your confined space entry permit for the distillation tower. In order to understand these procedures, however, you must understand the various roles involved in confined space entry. One of the most important of these roles is the attendant. The primary duty of the attendant is to monitor conditions inside and outside of the confined space to determine safe working conditions. This will also include making sure that the required safety, testing, and communication equipment is on hand and working. The attendant is in constant contact with the entrant. If conditions become unsafe, they must notify the entrant and get them out of there. The attendant must sound an evacuation order and summons an emergency rescue assistant if hazard is detected in the confined space or a change in the entrant behavior occurs. However, anyone can order immediate evacuation. Keep in mind that no one should perform rescue entry operations without backup. Now it is time to acquire equipment necessary to operate inside the distillation environment. You will need all the equipment you selected for the trench environment, along with the personal ventilation system, non-explosive light, and ear protection. Great. Now let's proceed to the flashing area behind you to go to the distillation tower. Along with the primary hazards I mentioned in the trench environment, there are also secondaries to consider. These include slips, trips, and falls, falling objects, heat stress, electrical shock or burns, and cutting or welding fumes. Keep this in mind as you perform your next task. Please move to the highlighted target area located at the valve assembly. The first step in ensuring the distillation and tower environment is safe to operate in is the process of isolation. To begin this process, you must first configure the valves to prevent material from entering the confined space and relieve pressure within the line itself. This will involve opening and closing various valves in a specific order. As we discuss each of the valves involved in this process, they will flash to indicate which valve is being referred to. The control valve, which is the main regulator of the flow of the line, is typically controlled remotely by an operator in a control room. Adjacent to the control valves are the gate valves. The gate valves provide additional on-site control over the flow of the line. These are the first valves you will personally have to close, and as you learned in the tutorial room, you can turn the valves by pressing your right controller to the valve handle, squeezing and holding the trigger, and moving the handle in the correct direction, clockwise to close, counterclockwise to open. Please approach and close the valve now. You have successfully closed the gate valves. The next valve involved in the isolation process is the bypass valve. Opening the bypass valve will relieve any buildup in pressure inside of the bypass line after the gate valves have been closed. Good. The bypass valve is now open. This brings us to the final valves involved in the isolation process, which are known as the bleed valves. These valves provide an escape for any material that remains in the line. Good job. You have completed the valve portion of the isolation procedure. However, this process is not foolproof. Additional safety measures need to be taken to assure the confined space is safe for entry. The final step in the isolation process is known as blinding. Here is a short video explaining the nature of this process. Now that you understand the blinding process, it's time for you to apply what you have learned to your current environment. On the ground in front of you, you will see a blinding plate. Take this plate and place it in the flashing coupler to finish isolating the line. Excellent! You have now completed the isolation process that ensures hazardous materials do not enter the confined space. Next, you will need to take atmospheric readings. Before you do this, let's review some facts about this procedure. You should always perform atmospheric testing in a certain order. This order begins with testing the environment's oxygen levels, then moving on to test the flammables, and concluding with testing for toxic contaminants. You will need to test the air inside of the manway without any portion of your body entering this area. The probe extension at the top of your monitor will be placed inside and the reading will appear on the monitor after pressing the A button. The values on your monitor indicate that the atmosphere inside the confined space is unsafe. This will require you to ventilate the area to try to disperse the hazardous vapors in the air. To ventilate a confined space, you should use a personal ventilation system to force the airflow into the hazardous area. Keep in mind that you should not use pure oxygen as a ventilation source, and that your personal ventilation system should not block the exit from the confined space. To complete the safety procedure, place the personal ventilation system at the entrance to the confined space. Okay, now the ventilation system should clear the air in the confined space area so that the atmospheric working conditions are safe again. However, you must wait 24 hours and retest the air before you safely enter the area. All right, now that 24 hours has passed, take another reading to test whether the manway is finally safe to enter. Go ahead and do that now. The values on the monitor indicate that the atmosphere inside the confined space is safe to work in, and that means you may move to the final step of the process, of confined space entry, which is of course discussing the permit with your supervisor. And in this case, it is me. After you've filled out the permit, you must meet with your supervisor to go over each aspect of the permit and to ensure that it's been filled out thoroughly and correctly. Your supervisor may have important comments to make or concerns to address. When the meeting is concluded and your supervisor agrees that you have filled out the permit correctly, they will sign it and you will be ready to enter the confined space to begin work. Congratulations on getting through this tutorial. Now that this is complete, you should be ready to undergo the testing portion of the simulation. In this section, you will need to go through the procedures we went through in this tutorial again, but without any guidance from me. You will also be presented with text-based questions. Your score will depend on how well you go through the procedures we covered and on whether your answers to the text-based questions are correct or not. Please approach the flashing spot on the ground behind you to be teleported back to the hub and begin testing. You will now begin the testing portion. Pay close attention to the permit I will display. As you go through this portion of the simulation, different sections of it will flash to indicate what your next task is. The various checkboxes on the permit will also indicate whether you have completed a certain task or not. At various points during the testing, you will also be presented with a text-based question that you must answer before continuing. To answer these questions, press your controller to the box that corresponds to the answer you would wish to select and squeeze the right trigger. If your answer is correct, the selected box will turn green. If your answer is incorrect, it will turn red. You must select the correct answer before continuing on. However, only your first attempt to answer the question will be counted towards your overall score.